Poland, I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, we thank you for organizing today's briefing. We thank the USG Voronkov and the Executive Director, Ms. Konings, for their briefings. We're convinced that fruitful cooperation with the organizations you head will guarantee progress in the fight against terrorism within the UN. We share many of the views in the 8th report of the Secretary-General on the ISIL threat. For our part, we wish to note the following. It would seem that the central element of these reports should remain information on the resource base for terrorists and the efforts to undermine that base. We once again emphasize that any trade and economic relations with individuals or organizations that are involved in ISIL's activities is a gross violation of the Security Council resolutions. All necessary measures on this have already been, or necessary decisions on this have already been taken. They need to be implemented in good faith, and people mustn't think that those measures are actually addressed at others. There have been significant successes in the fight against terrorism in Syria and Iraq, but the Middle East nonetheless remains a stronghold for ISIL's leadership. ISIL continues to carry out attacks, including on civilians. It's losing positions, but nonetheless terrorists try to create close cooperation with their brothers in arms, the same kinds of terrorists, just with different names, who are also acting in the Middle East. Efforts to subjugate ISIL in Iraq and Syria are continuing. We welcome the fact that the stabilization of the military and political situation in both countries has led to cutting off of channels and volume of financing for illegal armed groups. In particular, in Syria, terrorists who've lost control over broad stretches of territory have lost sources in terms of exactions they've been making from the population. Russia has facilitated normalizing the situation in Syria and Iraq through its counterterrorism cooperation, including as part of the coordination center in Baghdad. There's been a positive effect in Syria because of efforts for de-escalation that have been carried out by the country guarantors of the Astana process. We're also concerned by the unsolved problem of repatriating foreign terrorist fighters who've been fighting with ISIL and who've remained in Syria, and the issue is their repatriation to their countries of origin and their prosecution. President, we'd like to note the need to invite to the necessary briefings on ISIL the representatives of those states who are the greatest sufferers of this activity, first and foremost Syria and Iraq. We note the importance of receiving information from the conflict zone, and for this we think there's a need to work with the governments of those countries. The focus of our close attention remains the movements of foreign terrorist fighters to other conflict zones, for example in the countries of Africa, first and foremost those of the Sahara and the Sahel, and also Afghanistan, where they continue their terrorist activity. The Afghan wing of ISIL, despite the losses it suffered in the north, remains one of the key factors destabilizing the situation in that country. There is additional danger presented by its broad ideological propagandizing and recruitment activity, where it's making capable use of information and communications technologies. ISIL's activities in Afghanistan are also fed by foreign terrorist fighters who've received military experience in Iraq and Syria. We see the presence of groups in Afghanistan as a threat for the bordering countries of Central Asia. The high number of suicide bomber attacks also indicates that the group has human resources. We note certain progress in the work to block channels of financing for terrorists that have been carried out by bordering states. ISIL's income from contraband fuel is also something that continues to fall, but in autumn last year, fighters seized a number of oil fields in Deir ez-Zor province, which allowed them for a number of months to use a network of intermediaries to sell that fuel at a value of $30 to $35 a barrel. On the whole, since the previous report came out, the key areas of income for the largest terrorist groups in the region haven't undergone significant change. Fighters continue to take hostages, to hold them to ransom. They take part in the illegal drugs trade and also trade in agricultural products and human organs. They're also selling pieces of cultural heritage that they've seized on the black market. Their coffers are being filled through trading in industrial products, including sulfuric and phosphorus acid and cement. They're also investing in fishing in Iraq. They're speculating on the stock markets, receiving income from cryptocurrencies, playing in online casinos, and also making use of scams on the internet and deliveries of fake medicines. In some cases, to support their activity, fighters are even compelled to sell the weapons and ammunition that they have. Having said all of this, we shouldn't think that the heads of ISIL and Al-Qaeda are happy with the resources they already have. Together with associates from organized crime groups, they are constantly looking for new sources to finance their activity. For example, there have been attempts to establish control over channels of drug trafficking and contraband in useful minerals from Asian countries. And particular interest here is Afghanistan, as was mentioned earlier. In a number of Afghan provinces, there have been active illegal mining, processing and deliveries abroad of iron, copper, gold, jewels and semi-precious stones. In this context, once again, we wish to draw your attention to research or connected with ISIL of financial sources that's being carried out on Russia's initiative as part of the Financial Action Task Force, and that's been going on since 2016. At the moment, the Financial Action Task Force Secretariat has information from more than 40 jurisdictions that allows us to get a good picture of the financial and economic machine behind ISIL. President, unfortunately, despite our repeated calls, the UN continues not to focus on the important task of cutting off financing for terrorist organizations coming from military-related goods. It's no secret that to provide terrorists with weapons, often the grey market and export of weapons is made use of. When these deals are somewhat transparent, it seems that these terrorist groups pass themselves off as opposition movements in order to gain these weapons. We call on all states to pay particular attention to issues of regulating the middlemen in such deals, in criminalizing illegal brokerage, and in developing a flexible system of risk assessment for exports. Also in improving interstate exchange of information and developing mechanisms to take into account of and monitor transfers of weapons. For our part, we intend to continue to play an active role in global counter-terrorism efforts in supporting the UN's activities in this area, including by providing assistance to foreign partners. We confirm that we have an interest in constructive dialogue with all interested parties. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation.